Morning, guys. I hope you're doing well wherever you are in the world in these crazy times that we're in. I got to say, this morning I'm feeling extremely thankful for the NHS in the UK. It doesn't look like much now. It's not that much, to be honest. But I put a cog on my bike through my finger. And I went down to the NHS. They gave me a tetanus jab because I wasn't sure if I'd had one. They looked at it and they convinced me to go back this morning for an x-ray. I got to say, it was world class, first class service for free. All you do is you give your address, you've paid your taxes, and you walk in. And I know this isn't the case everywhere around the world, but Sue and Jane at the Teddington Walk-in Centre, thank you so much. You made me feel, one, not stupid for coming in, two, extremely cared for, and three, that's all in the midst of this crazy pandemic. I am very thankful for the NHS. I wish that more countries around the world could experience the same kind of feeling of safety net that it gives you, and we really need to protect it here in the UK as well. I have a renewed appreciation. Sorry for wasting your time with a bike injury. Anyway, today's video is a little bit different. We started a couple of weeks ago setting out the premise of this dialectic with Tom, and then we looked at some of the boundaries and the structure at it last time with David. A couple of nights ago, I find myself on YouTube late at night in the wormhole, and Google must be listening to everything we're talking about and I'm saying, because all of a sudden the algorithm was spitting out videos that seemed to be bang on for this conversation. I stumbled across a 2-hour conversation between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson at the O2 Arena 2 years ago. Firstly, incredible, isn't it, that two thinkers are sitting in chairs talking to each other and thousands of people are paying for tickets to go and see them. Probably a good thing. But right from the get-go, and I will link that video in the description and put it at the end of the video so you can go watch the whole thing if you're interested. But right from the get-go, rationality is the sort of battleground they find themselves on. And I was getting more and more intrigued by this video, to the point where at 1 a.m. I started recording notes because I just thought I would forget what I was thinking when I was listening to them. So I've got a bunch of these clips, poorly recorded, recordings of the TV. It's all atrocious bootleg recordings. But instead of splicing out the video and putting it in all professionally now that I'm sitting at the desk, I want to leave them the way they are, because I think it's important to embrace the premise of writing drunk and editing sober. I wasn't drunk, but it was late at night and things were free flowing for me. And now I'm sitting sober with my coffee at the desk trying to make sense of it all. So I'm going to look with you, not just at what I think the relevant parts of Peterson and Harris's conversation is for this dialectic, but also what this dialectic, this topic of beautiful irrationality, could have offered their conversation. But I'm going to look at both what they say and what I say in my tired state, and try to look at it with a bit of distance and try and see whether there was any useful comments in there. I'd be really interested to see what you make of this video. It's a bit wacky and out there. When I was looking at it late at night, the feeling was definitely that there was something missing in their conversation, and I'd be very keen to see whether you view it with the same lens that I was seeing it. And I'm very interested to know whether you and I now agree with my drunken self who was watching the video originally. All right. But before we get into it, I want to pick up on a comment that I saw in the last YouTube video from Woodage and Buddage, where he says, "Blimey, lots to think about. I'm a PhD scientist. I don't consider myself smart. Okay. I think this is really interesting and big thinking. Is it just compartmentalizing our thoughts, or is it challenging our inner beings? Not sure. Good stuff." To be honest, this is exactly what I'm hoping for in this conversation, is that it just begins to sort of soften up the ground or turn over the soil of your minds a little bit, to begin to sort of loosen off and get you to consider some of your foundations. So I'm not interested in responding to it, but I'm just really chuffed that you're listening, that you're clearly an accomplished person who's finding it a bit unsettling, hopefully in the best possible way. Let's get into it. It's a weird thing to try and inject yourself into the conversation. It'd probably mean as well, if I put it in my thumbnail, that I'll get more views. And it's not really the point. Maybe I want to do that, I don't know. But I am really enjoying it, but also finding it a little bit painful that they're knocking heads. Basically, they could have more agreement than they're having, in my opinion. Anyway, have a look and see.
We need poetry and fiction, and then there's more to engaging with reality than being a scientist in a white lab coat. But we need to be able to clearly distinguish fact from fantasy, or fact from merely fertile flights of the imagination. We want to be rigorous there and rational there, and it's not that there's no place for mere creativity that's not
well, I guess, well,
on
then
the rails of rationality.
Well, look, fair enough then.
Mere creativity. This is the first thing that made my ears prick up and go, oh, I'm not just watching a YouTube video passively anymore. This is core to the work I'm interested in, because the word mere itself automatically lands you in this sort of pejorative sense. And it's quite revealing, I think, for the rest of the conversation, why things unfold as they do. And obviously these guys are just having a free-flowing conversation. It would be interesting to know what they would say now, but straight from the off, Jordan Peterson says, yeah, fair enough then, when Sam Harris introduces the term of mere creativity. And for me, that sets the tone. The map is made for the rest of the conversation, and it doesn't surprise me that the rest of it unfolds the way that it does because of that.
One thing we know for sure, and which we have begun to dimly understand and describe scientifically, is that we are bad at all of these calculations.
Yes.
Right? Like the hyperbolic discounting of future rewards.
Well, that's also why I think we have these stringent limitations on rationality, Sam, is that we can't solve the problem through calculation.
Well, no, but we increasingly can.
I think the fact that the rationalist ethos doesn't have motivational push is actually a fatal flaw.
They don't meet every week to read Marcus Aurelius.
Like, there's no music that goes along with it. There's no art that goes along with it. There's no architecture that goes along with it.
But to be fair to the present, most music and most art and most architecture is no longer religious.
The starting point to get on the same page with Harris would be for Peterson to create a defense of irrationality, because that then holds the space that mythology, artistry, non-rational, sort of non-goal orientated behavior can sit comfortably within the conception of what it means to be a modern full human. And I think secondly, instrumental rationality is about how to maximize utility to yourself in an effective way. Now, art just doesn't follow the same creative process as that. I had a very talented musician come in to sit with me around the fire in the woods last week, and we were talking about how he's not in control of the things that come to him, but he finds great meaning in being there to receive it. And Harris is speaking about all non-religious art, as in secular art, as belonging to the rationalists. But I think that couldn't be further from the truth. Good art that is non-religious belongs neither to the religious nor to the rationalists. It belongs to those who are brave enough to surrender and realize that we don't know a lot, and that they are willing to surrender to that, even though it is still a completely unknown abyss, and be willing to be an available vessel to channel that which comes to them. Which brings me back to the beginning. Peterson says, when we look into the unknown, we quickly bring a veil of fantasy. That's where we need to see the fantasy for what it is, because it is when we as humans, as the Homo creatix amorum, the creative lover, look into the abyss. Sometimes we get struck by lightning, and sometimes that can create some shockwaves in the world when we let it flow through us. That does not come from any kind of structure of calculated rationality. To both of them, my point here is, if I was sitting in Douglas Murray's chair, I'd be saying, guys, listen, what we need to be arguing about is that creativity is not mere. It is in the heart of the conception of what it means to be human. And irrationality is not to be pejoratized. It is the source of art. And that balance needs to be found. Okay, Drunk Dave actually said that better than I think I can now. Yeah, I introduced this idea of Homo creatix amorum. If I look at how I'm designing my life now, I'm trying to live on grid and off grid. And when I'm on grid, I'm trying to participate in the system as it is. I'm trying to earn money, but there's limits to that. But what we've created space for over in the woods is this other space that isn't about goals and isn't about financial productivity. It's about other stuff. It's about deeper experiences. It's about tuning into the creation. It's about being friends with people and embracing core human values, diversity, dependence, being, and seeing what emerges. And for me, There is a different part of what it means to be human, a different conception of humanity that is a more helpful proxy to help you understand how a human behaves in that space. And for me, that is this Homo creatix. It's the soul of a female creator. That's because it's a better description of the systemic or relational thinking that you tend to get led to when you're in a first-hand experience. There's not extrapolated conceptual systems you have to engage with like money when you're in the woods. You're just looking at the fire, you're observing the flowers, you're listening to the birds, you're seeing that human in front of you, not the labels or what they do in the world, but that being that's sitting right with you. And that really comes from the systemic nurturing side of the mind. As Ray Ison said in the New Agreements podcast, that we need to restore our systemic sensibilities. And in the Latin of creatix, we see that feminine spirit of nurturing creativity sort of restored. And then as a kind of possessive secondary feature, the genitive of amorum, which means the creatix possesses this amorum attribute, which is the plural or genitive case of amor, which means love. And so for me, humans are the creators who love. That is the identity I'm describing that we have seen formed, that I've experienced in the woods. What it means to live in modern society is to be able to keep the Homo economicus in check with the Homo creatix amorum. The other thing I like about the word amor is where the word amateur came from. And amateur means doing it for the love. Doing it for the love. And that is where a lot of the best innovations have come from. Monks in their sheds, tinkering, doing stuff for the love. And I think we need to see a revival of amateurism or doing it for the amour in our political system. We've professionalized what it means to represent civilians, and I'm not sure that that's the best approach given the technologies we now have available. Who doesn't like to receive anything that was done for the amour? Jordan starts now to get onto the territory of pain and trauma and the role of the irrational landscape in reaching those points in us, which I think is very well said.
What allows them to recover from their post-traumatic stress disorder. And dealing with people like that in my clinical practice, the same thing has been the case. If we can't transcend the language of the merely rational and move into an intense conversation about good and evil in some sense as metaphysical realities, we can't enter a realm of seriousness, conceptual seriousness, that's of sufficient depth to help heal someone who's been touched by malevolence.
I mean, it's beautifully said, but for me, this is a fascinating psychological point as a clinician that Peterson's making, which is, of all the topics he talks about, this is the area that he is most qualified to discuss. What he's saying is, if we just approach people through rational prose and reasoning, it doesn't actually heal people's real world experiences that are causing them trouble. I would love to understand the psychological papers and research that back this point up, but intuitively I get it, that in our psychological models, we store stuff in stories, and the language of rationality doesn't necessarily get far enough into our psyche, into our souls, to restore and heal when we've been hurt. I think if we can find the research that backs that up, that adds not just artistic but psychological value to the case of the irrational landscape as I'm talking about it. It also goes quite far into explaining this almost intrinsic relationship between painful and beautiful irrationality. You know, a lot of great art comes out of tragic pain, and I don't claim to understand that relationship yet, but I think it adds fuel to that fire. Sam inadvertently gets Peterson back to the topic of creativity here by taking issue with the idea that the Bible is special in some way, that it was different to the Greek texts that were written at a similar time. It's not that I'm interested in, it's the source of inspiration that I want us to focus on.
You're saying that there's somebody who's taking dictation that is unlike any other dictation. So Homer, though creative, or Shakespeare, though creative, was doing something else.
Sources of inspiration.
Okay, but
but
everyone's been inspired.
If you talk to creative people,
yes,
they often describe themselves as something approximating a conduit through which higher wisdom is pouring.
Yeah, it's interesting. They are touching it now, and Sam doesn't want to talk about creativity very much. I think he does see it as mere.
But this session, if indeed you're making it, and I'm still not sure, is the eradication of traditional Christianity.
Well, if something is deeply wise,
Yeah.
it's reflective of a deeper reality. Otherwise,
Yes.
it wouldn't be wise.
I'm in love with deeper realities.
So what's the deeper reality that something as wise as the story of Cain and Abel reflects?
The
reality?
A landscape of mind that either takes great training, great luck, or pharmacological bombardment of the human brain to explore.
I mean, we are literally at the nub of the issue right here. They're literally crying out to each other, what is the reality that we're discussing? You know, philosophy means the love of wisdom, and Peterson's saying that wisdom can only be wisdom if it relates to reality. And so what's the deeper reality that these stories like Cain and Abel in the Bible are getting to, that so eloquently and concisely explaining some deep human traits? But the space I want to hold in the middle here, and to sort of turn their debate into a bit more of a dialectic space where there's room for a synthesis, a room for a third way, if you like. Sam is thinking that if Peterson concedes that the Bible is not special, then it concedes the ground to rationalists. It's all just the mind, and those substructures are nice to haves but not necessary. And Peterson is concerned to give up this ground, in my opinion, and so therefore stays vague on this topic because he's worried about the ramifications of what happens if we throw away all of that substructure, all the stories that have made its way through thousands of years. My little space in the middle that I'm trying to hold here is to say that the inspiration was not unique is not to say that it's not special, and that it is a third category in the middle, which is the valuing of irrationality. It's not divinely and uniquely ordained and spiritual, and it's also not a product of just sort of scientific exploration of mind in a rational way. It's this third beautiful area of irrationality. I might just be in like a lockdown COVID bubble and just believing my own hype, but for me it is so clear to let go of the theology that we've inherited without letting go of the psychological substructures that we need to find meaning, to receive inspiration, and to heal the deeper parts of us that hurt and yearn for that kind of systemic attention. Let's carry on.
There's been a barrier to entry to thinking creatively about alternatives to religion. And so much of atheism and secularism is just a pitched battle against the eroding power of religion. I mean,
That's interesting. So, because I see his lack of appreciation for creativity, and I think that is because, now I'm hearing him say it, that feels he's still in a fight against the big bully in the playground, if you like. It does make sense, actually, if I look at Sam Harris through the lens of someone who's just been fighting, taking that fighting role. Actually, there's not much room for creativity. It's quite low down the hierarchy in a sense.
Well, obviously, I have no idea what Sam Harris's personal life looks like, his real life, but in terms of what the dialogue he has to hold as a public thinker, they're in this dogfight the whole time, trying not to concede narrative space so that the other one's argument becomes stronger, which is a false dichotomy from my perspective, but let's carry on.
A minimal recipe for a good life, it's not that this is all that's entailed, this is certainly necessary, if not sufficient, is to live a life that is increasingly motivated by love and guided by reason. Right? You can't go very far wrong if you are motivated by love and guided by reason.
Sam is saying, intend to do love and be supported by reason. I don't disagree with that, but the point of life is not to not go far wrong. We need to do that to some extent, but we also need to inject ourselves into the world. We also need to make something, and that's where the meaning comes from.
Part of the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing is to try to address the void. At the beginning of Genesis, for example, there's a proposition that it's truthful speech that generates habitable order from chaotic potential. That seems to me to be the fundamental narrative, and I do believe there's something dead accurate and real about that, because we do generate the world as a consequence of our communicative effort.
The meta-minded story over generations of Judeo-Christian tradition, if you rip away that substructure, you leave a big void. And so what's your answer, Sam? And he's saying, well, we've been getting persecuted. There's not much room for creativity. I think if you pull it out, we're all right. But then obviously everyone's coming to Peterson because they're going, I want my void filled. And I think we do have a void that we want filled with something, and something will fly in there. Something's got to hit the deeper part of being. Sam is convinced that it is all about ideas. It is all about the thinking mind. What ideas do we put in our minds that makes all the difference? I think that does make a difference. But I think the void that can be filled is the void that embraces the conception of us as Homo creatix amorum. I create, therefore I am. I don't know if I believe that statement, but it's that kind of sentiment that it's not, I think, therefore I am, as we heard about in the last conversation with David from Kant. Yes, there's reason in there somewhere, but it's not the most important thing to say, because to know that you are connecting with and behaving from, engaging with people in light of your creativity, your authentic self, your authentic creative self, makes meaning. And it is the surprising and emergent moments that come from that adventure flowing with our environment in a increasingly harmonious way. To the extent that we embrace that conception of the humanity is to the extent to which we reduce the void and we relieve the pressure on reason.
Truth be told, I need to spend more time thinking about whether I mean this, but I like it as an idea. What Drunk Dave is saying is to burden rationality with the whole identity of what it means to be human is a task too big for it to bear. And actually, if we make space for the beautiful irrational, then that scaffolding can then allow people to let go of what can be sometimes more painfully irrational. To take that point a little further, if Sam Harris was sitting here or one of the other four horsemen was sitting here, I might try to sell the beautiful irrational landscape as a necessary piece of scaffolding that shares the stage with rationality for the conception of humanity. But the benefit of conceding that bit of space will be, one, hopefully better art, and you can actually include the moments where people get struck by lightning of creativity into your sort of sense of identity, but also allow people to view their theological roots differently, not in a way that they are believed and lived inside, but that the wisdom that can be extracted from them is valued as part of this evolving meta mind that we've found ourselves within. I think that there's value for Sam Harris as well as for Peterson in embracing this kind of terrain.
This is cool. They circle back to Sam's conception of, the good life is reason serving love. And I'm glad they've come back to it.
In the metaphysic that you outlined, rationality in the service of love, is it rationality or is it love? Because I don't understand the place in your conceptual system for love, given your emphasis on rationality as the mechanism of ethics.
I didn't actually pick this point out the first time I watched it, so I'm glad I'm watching it again. You use rationality as your framework for ethics, so where does love fit with that if you've already got your ethical framework? It seems to me that without a sufficient level of intelligence, humans can't establish a state of rationality. And I'm not sure that whether ethics and morality can be established without a certain level of rationality. I'm trying to ask myself, if I'm holding Homo creatix amorum and I'm holding Homo economicus as my two models of what it means to be human, where is it that my ethical content comes from? I actually, now I've thought about it, I agree with Peterson that it doesn't fit within that. And this goes on to myself at Harris, that surely what they're missing, what he needs to embrace is the sense that the full human has both the rational, irrational, and beautiful rational parts. And that's how love fits within, alongside his rational framework. I actually think that Harris is describing what I'm looking for, but he doesn't know it.
You smuggle in love, and it essentially plays the same role.
Well, no, love is an experienced reality. I mean, love is a state of consciousness. It's a state of, and I wouldn't ultimately.
Is it a fact?
Well, it's a fact that one can experience it or not.
Well, yeah, but that's not the same thing.
No, it is. I mean, there are.
It's a fact that you can experience something, but the thing that you're experiencing is. There's also the thing that you're experiencing as a fact.
Well, no, there are facts about the range of human experiences.
John Searle could help these guys here fumbling over their words, where he says, you can make epistemically objective claims about ontologically subjective experiences. That is to say, you can have a science of consciousness that is objective, but that actually the experience itself is subjective or ontological. They should be revising their John Searle. John Searle's a legend, by the way. You should go check him out.
But the crucial thing is
the fact. I agree with you.
It is a fact that loving someone entails their love and its counterfeits, right? People can confuse, romantic, attachment or lust with love, right? So and the Buddhists are especially good at differentiating these various states of consciousness. And this true pleasure, mental pleasure in the company of another that is colored by a commitment to their well-being, a wanting them to be happy, a wanting to have their hopes realized, a non-zero sum commitment. My appeal to you is that we should want to use all the best tools available without hamstringing ourselves by this notion that certain tools must be the best for all time.
It's just struck me. I don't know why I didn't connect earlier, probably because it's 2 a.m. But Sam is talking about painful irrationality. He is still stuck on trying to decouple rationality from painful irrationality. And I give up that ground a long time ago. People's subscription to irrational stories and then their outworking of that causes terrible pain. But I'm interested in the top side of it. I hope this for Sam Harris, that he will embrace that there is room for this irrationality, but it's ground that he can't give up right now because it would be too muddying of the water for what he's trying to achieve.
So upon sober reflection, I still think it holds up. I still think that this stuff would have been helpful in establishing more agreement and getting into more nuance into the overlap and differences in their views, but at least talking the same language. I am never more than ever have I been more desperate to hear from people about what they think about this, because I'm out on a limb here. These guys are super heavyweights. In one sense, I've got no right. And also I'm in lockdown. I'm not seeing as many people as I normally do. So I've got no idea if I'm going Lupe fiasco or whether I'm on the money here. To me, it feels like it all makes sense. Anyway, please give me your thoughts, comments, send it on to someone. If you think they might be willing to watch it, have a thought. And also love to have different people on to discuss various sides of the argument and maybe add more structure to the terrain of beautiful irrationality as we go. It's taken a bit of a left turn in this video. I'm not sure where we go from here, but I'm enjoying it. I hope you are too. Take care of yourselves, look after each other, and I'll see you very soon.